Welcome back to Tales of Knights and Magic. Subscribe if you like, and now get comfortable, and enjoy this glimpse into the world of fantasy. Moonlight dripped like mercury over Ebon Spire's narrow quarter, turning every slick cobblestone into a liquid ribbon of silver. Eric Solren moved between shuttered stalls and cracked lanterns, the satchel at his side heavy with night bloom petals whose ghostly fragrance clung to his cloak. Each inhalation reminded him how close he was tonight to the codex of Celine's first fragment. A single page might unlock the path to the elixir that could awaken his sister. He paused beneath a crumbling aqueduct arch, where moss-slick stones rose into the moonlit sky. Here the ancient water channels had long since dried, leaving dark hollows rumored to harbor both treasure and death. Eric's pulse throbbed. With trembling fingers he unhooked a slender vial of sunrise dew, the only thing potent enough to neutralize the warding glyphs blocking the codex's alcove. A soft voice drifted from the shadows. "You'll need that." Lorraine of the Veilborn stepped forward, cloak pulled tight against the night chill. In her gloved hand glimmered a length of silver filigreed wire braided with moonstone dust. "Run this along the glyphs, it'll dampen their glow for just long enough." She unfurled a narrow map sealed with pale moonwax. "The painter's entrance is here, beneath the third arch from the eastern wall." Eric nodded, heart hammering. "Thank you." He secured the wire and map inside his coat. "And Lorraine, when I have the fragment, I'll need a fast exit." She tilted her head, pale hair catching stray moonbeams. "I'll be waiting at the old sluice gate, but hurry. Vorin's shadows stir when moonlight wanes." Without another word, Eric stepped beneath the arch. The air cooled, and his lantern's beam splintered against a line of glowing runes carved into the stone lintel. Kneeling, he dipped the moonstone dust wire into the sunrise dew and traced a line along each rune. As the final droplet fell, the glyphs winked out like dying stars. He slipped inside. The tunnel beyond was choked with fallen masonry, and trailing roots that dripped cold water. Eric pressed himself flat against the wall as distant echoes of dripping water mingled with his own ragged breath. Each footfall raised motes of dust that drifted in his lantern's glow. Up ahead, a pair of stone-hewn doors barred his path, its carvings depicting Celine's silver crescent cradling an open book. He unfastened the stolen map and found the hidden release, an obscure engraving of 3 overlapping moons. With a practiced thumb, he pressed each in turn. The doors swung inward with a groan of shifting rock. Eric's lantern revealed a circular chamber lined with alcoves inlaid with black basalt. In the center, on a raised dais lay the codex fragment, a single vellum leaf bound in obsidian leaf filigree, its script shimmering as though inked with pure moonlight. His breath caught, but as he stepped forward, the flicker of ghost-white robes appeared at the chamber's rim. Master Verburend, staff aglow with residual lunar power. His gaunt face was set in ominous calm. "Bravo, Eric Solren," he intoned. "You have silenced the wards. Now prove you deserve the codex." From behind Verburend's staff sprouted moonwraiths, pale specters of silver flame that drifted forward, hungry for earthly souls. Eric's hand went to his dagger of polished brass. "I only want the truth," he called, voice firm despite the wraith's cold approach. "Stand aside, Verburend." The exiled alchemist shook his head. "No," he said softly. "First you must face your own reflection in Moonfire's edge." He swept his staff in a slow arc. The wraiths converged on Eric, their hollow eyes reflecting every fear he'd buried. His sister's vacant stare, the price of his obsession, the danger of meddling with life and death. Eric squared his shoulder, drawing a slow breath. He stepped into the moonwraith circle and held his dagger aloft, blade catching a sliver of moonlight. "I face them, because what I seek is more than power," he whispered. "It is mercy." The wraiths hesitated, then a cold wind rose in the chamber as Eric pressed forward, every step echoing his vow. And beneath the ruined vault of moonlit stone, the first trial of the Moonlight Alchemist truly began. Eric closed his eyes for a heartbeat, and centered himself on the single truth that drove him, his sister's pale form, trapped in suspended slumber. He opened them to find the moonwraiths hovering mere feet away, their flickering forms humming with spectral hunger. He let his dagger drop to a two-handed grip, the brass hilt cool in his palms. With a muted war cry born of desperation rather than rage, he lunged into the circle of ghosts. The nearest wraith recoiled at the scent of his resolve, allowing Eric's blade to slice through its shimmering form. The dagger passed through what felt like cold mist, and for a moment, he tasted frost on his tongue, but the wraith collapsed to ash at his feet. 2 more surged forward, tendrils of moonlight crackling around their emaciated limbs. Eric pivoted, using the first fallen wraith's ash-piled form as a shield. He snapped the blade upward, carving a line of pure silver through the second specter's chest. It wailed, a mournful keening that curled through the chamber and dissolved into motes of dripping light. But the final wraith advanced unchecked, its hollow eyes locking onto Eric's heart. As he stepped back, his lantern wavered, casting the chamber into uneasy half-shadows. The wraith's clawed fingers reached out and Eric felt a chill like 1,000 sighs brush his cheek. He realized that brute force alone would not suffice. This spirit mirrored more than fear, it fed on doubt. Eric's breath came in ragged gasps as he held eye contact with the wraith. He steadied his voice and spoke the words that anchored him to purpose. I do this to save what I love, not to control life or death but to restore balance. His steel blade glowed faintly, warmed by the sincerity in his heart. He extended the dagger not in strike but in offer. The wraith paused, its form shivering with silent agitation. Eric lowered his stance and extended one hand, empty, open in trust. I honor your sorrow, he murmured. I honor what has been lost. But not here, not like this. For a breathless moment, ghost light and brass reflected each other in the still air. Then the wraith's form fractured. Tendrils of silver blue drifted into the walls, unraveling the thread of its existence until it dissolved entirely into motes of gentle radiance. Silence reclaimed the chamber. The only sound was Eric's racing pulse. He wiped sweat from his brow and turned to Vorind, whose stern gaze had softened into an inscrutable smile. Well done, the exiled alchemist said quietly. You have proven more than strength. You have proven compassion. That is the true alloy of the elixir you seek. Eric exhaled, body trembling with relief. Beyond him, on the obsidian dais, the codex fragment hovered, its silver-etched script glowing in invitation. He stepped forward, heart steady again, and lifted the vellum page from its cradle. As he did, the chamber's moonlight shifted, revealing new runes carved into the far wall, runes yet to be deciphered. With the fragment secure in his satchel, and Vorind's nod of approval, Eric turned toward the aqueduct's exit. In the distance, he could hear the muted beat of the city's heart. Ebonspire's living lanterns flickering in anticipation of his return. The first trial was complete, but the codex had already whispered of deeper mysteries. Missing pages, veiled chambers, and the ever-looming shadow of the children of the eclipse. Clutching the codex's moonlit leaf, Eric Soldrin stepped back into the tunnel's gloom, and into the next verse of a quest that promised both salvation and endless, silvered questions. Eric emerged from the aqueduct's darkness into the lantern-lit hush of Ebonspire's narrow quarter, the codex fragment heavy in his satchel. Lorraine waited beneath the moon's shattered arch, cloak drawn tight against the night air. At her side stood Lissa, eyes bright with relief and curiosity. My sister, Eric whispered, voice thick. I have the first page, but it speaks of 3 more, hidden in places where moonlight wanes. He offered the vellum leaf, its silver script pulsing like a living star. Lorraine's gloved fingers trembled as she unrolled. In silence its crypt the moonstone weeps. Beneath the tide where shadow sleeps, Lissa's brow furrowed. Silence its crypt, the drowned chapel beneath the old harbor, and beneath the tide, the submerged sanctum of the moonless isle. Eric nodded, heart pounding. We must recover the second page there, before the children of the eclipse reach it. He looked to Lorraine. Can your Velborn contacts secure a vessel? Lorraine's lips curved in a determined half-smile. There's a smuggler's sloop, hidden in Frostdock. It sails for Moonless Isle at dawn. If we can slip past the harbor patrol. Lissa hefted her satchel of moonstone dust. Then I'll guide you through the flooded catacombs, beneath the chapel. My secret tunnels will spare you the tides above. Eric drew a steadier breath than he felt. And I will learn what compassion forged this first trial, so I may face the next. He glanced back toward the cold glow of the aqueduct behind them, its wards now silent, but still humming with the memory of moonwraiths. Above, a single star winked through drifting clouds as if in promise. Though he carried only one fragment of the codex, Eric felt the weight of every path still untread, and every choice yet unmade. As they slipped into the twisting alleys toward Frostdock, Ebonspire's moonlit streets whispered behind them of both peril and hope. And somewhere in the city's sleeping heart, shadows stirred in anticipation of the Moonlight Alchemist's next pilgrimage, one that would lead him deeper into living tides, drowned sanctums in the very edge of night itself. They slipped through the winding lanes of the narrow quarter until the briny tang of the harbor filled their nostrils. Frostdock lay in near silence beneath dockside lanterns, containers stacked like sleeping leviathans, and masts creaking as ships swayed in the moonlit swell. Lorraine led them to a shadowed berth, where a slim sloop named Night's Whisper lay hidden under tattered nets. Its hull was streaked with salt and soot, and a single lantern swung at the stern, painting the deck in wavering silver. A wiry figure, a smuggler known only as Jex, waited by the gangplank, hood drawn low. No room for more than 6, Jex rasped, eyeing their small band. Fog lifts at dawn outside, patrols run thin. You pay, we sail, no question. Eric nodded and handed over a small pouch of moonstone dust. Jex, eyes gleamed. Enough to sweeten any guard's purse. He hopped aboard. Get on. Lissa took first watch as they slipped away from the pier, oars muffled by oil-slicked plank. The air was thick with fog, ghostly tendrils curling around the sloop's bow. Eric leaned over the rail, sea spray cold on his fingertips, heart thudding with equal parts dread and resolve. Moonless isle in 2 nights, Jex murmured from the stern. But the tides in the channel shift. You'll need more than moonstone. Have your wards ready. He tucked a black iron harpoon into its holder. Eric closed his eyes and whispered the Chronicle's ward of calm, tide of night, and silent deep. Hold your breath, and shadows sleep. The fog thinned in a drifting circle around Night's whisper, revealing only the next 6 paces of water. Lorraine exhaled, dusting sand from her palms. That should keep the patrols off our scent, at least until we clear the channel. They settled into uneasy silence, each lost in thoughts of drowned chapels, hidden wards, and the sisters' moon coma, waiting on the far side of their quest. Above them, the moon's pale arc watched in quiet witness, as if marking the exact moment their journey bent from earthly paths to the living tides of legend. And so, beneath a sky unbroken by starlight, Eric Solrin, the Moonlight Alchemist, sailed toward ruins beneath the waves. A single fragment of the codex bound in his satchel, and 1,000 questions still shimmering on the tide's edge. The sea breeze grew colder as Night's whisper crept through the channel's narrow throat. Lanterns on either bank blinked like distant fireflies, then vanished as the curved coastline swallowed them. Lissa kept watch at the prow, eyes sharp for the jagged breakers that heralded the drowned chapel's hidden inlet. Eric stood at the rail, clutching the codex fragment in one hand and the vial of sunrise dew in the other. His other hand brushed the dagger at his belt, a reminder that steel might yet be needed below the waves. Lorraine crouched near the mast, studying the faded map by lantern glow. We're clear of patrols, she murmured. Dive points just ahead. Jakes cut the engines and the oars fell silent. The hull drifted in a swirl of phosphorescent plankton that flared white in the moonlight. Eric inhaled, shoulders rigid with purpose. Ready your wards, he whispered. Erin murmured the Chronicle's silent night incantation. Violet sigils blossoming on her palms. Marin set a length of silver filigreed glass conduit at the rail, an improvised air tube for their descent. Lissa led the way off the port side, feet slipping into the sea. Her form vanished beneath the surface with only a faint ripple as farewell. One by one they followed. Marin's goggles fogged in the salt water, Jex's harpoon trailing small bubbles of breath, Kaelin's armor gleaming through wave and shadow. Eric lingered until he felt the cold embrace of the tide, then let himself sink after them. Below the surface, the world shifted to blue and green gloom. Pillars of barnacled stone rose like ancient sentinels around the collapsed roof of the drowned chapel. Stained glass shards lay embedded in seaweed, and bronze candelabras clung to broken walls, their metalwork now host to living coral. Eric exhaled in wonder, then saw Lissa's silhouette ahead, hand raised toward a submerged arch. They finned through kelp forest toward the arch, where a rusted iron door quivered on its hinge with every pulse of the tide. 2 skeletal guardians, maritime golems animated by drowned moon runes, stood watch. Eric drew a pearl-handled knife and whispered the ward of tides, depths of moon and silent keep. Bound to life beneath the deep, a soft glow rippled from his blade, and the guardians' empty eye sockets dimmed. They slumped into barnacle-crusted stone as the tide drained from their forms. Lorraine surfaced for a pocket breather and hauled the iron door inward. A gush of brine-tainted water flooded the small inner chamber, revealing a stone lectern carved with crescent motifs. There, atop a bed of shell dust, lay the second codex page, its silver script refracting the dim light into dancing runes. Marin pried the fragment free and stashed it in her satchel, whispering thanks to the drowned saints. Above, a low rumble hinted that the tide was rising fast. Soon this chamber would vanish again beneath the wave. Eric led the group back the way they came, navigating by the faint glow of Yura's wards. When their heads broke the surface, the sloop bobbed silently in a pool of bioluminescent shimmer. Lissa helped him aboard, face pale but triumphant. We have 2 pages, she panted, and 2 still to find. As Night's whisper turned away from the aisle, Eric stood at the rail, the 2 moonlit pages secure in his leather satchel. Ahead lay uncharted waters, and the promise that every answer they recovered would only deepen the mystery of the elixir of lunar transcendence. Under the watchful eye of the waning moon, they sailed on toward dawn. The dawn light painted Ebon Spire's rooftops in pale gold by the time Night's whisper tied off at Frostdock. Eric and his companions slipped ashore, water dripping from their robes and goggles, the 2 codex pages safe in Marin's satchel. Lorraine led them through misted alleys to a stone-arched plaza beside the Great Cistern, a vaulted reservoir fed by mountain springs. Its aged basin was dry now, its marble floor cracked and dull. "This is the Court of Broken Wells," Lorraine whispered. "Once the heart of Evanspire's water council, the 3rd page lies in the Temple of Tides beneath, but the ward there reacts only to living water." They descended a spiral staircase into subterranean vaults where carved aqueducts tunneled in every direction. The air was stale and smelled of mildew. Echoes of dripping water rang hollow. Caelim's armor rattled as he led the way, blade drawn. Lyssa's crystal shard cast dancing light across the walls. Era's wards hugged the corridor in violet haze. At a squared chamber, Marin knelt before a basalt fountain triple spouted with empty nozzles. Silver glyphs ran along the rim, spelling instructions in ancient Aquan script. Eric dipped his hand into the codex's first page ink, an alchemical reagent infused with moonlight, and traced the glyph for flow. When his fingers tapped the spouts, each nozzle sputtered to life with living water, spilling in gentle arcs that sang like distant rain. The chamber trembled as tide runes glowed, and the floor's central stone slid aside to reveal a hidden stairway. They hurried down, emerging into a vaulted grotto lit by phosphorescent algae clinging to mossy wall. At its center, on a dais carved like a spiraling whirlpool, rested the 3rd fragment, vellum bound in swirling tide ink. Eric stepped forward, only to freeze at the sound of metal on stone. Master Varain emerged from the shadows, staff aglow with lunar power. "You have proven compassion and courage," he said quietly. "But wisdom demands sacrifice." He raised a glass vial of black seawater. "Pour this into the fountain above, and seal the aqueduct forever. Or take the page and doom half the city to thirst." The vial's liquid glimmered with necrotic tides, and Eric's heart clenched. He glanced at his friends, Kellen's stern gaze, Lyssa's fierce loyalty, Marin's trembling hope. Water was life, but his sister's fate demanded the codex whole. Eric held the page aloft. "True balance requires more than mercy," he murmured. With steady hands, he broke the vial against the date. Black water hissed into the grotto stream, but before it could stain the living flow, Eric chanted the Chronicle's Tide Ward, "By moon and tide, restrain this blight, turn poisoned wave to healing light." A surge of crystalline water burst from the fountain above, washing the black tide back into oblivion. Voron's eyes widened in astonishment as the corrupted water dissolved into harmless mist. The seals on the aqueduct glowed open once more. The 3rd page floated free of the dais in a ribbon of living tide ink. Eric caught it and pressed it to his chest. Voron lowered his staff, a slow smile breaking his somber features. "You have shown the path of true alchemy, sacrifice without cruelty," he said. "Take your fragment." As they climbed back toward the sunlit plaza, Eric tucked the 3rd page into his satchel, heart heavy with the knowledge that every choice carried consequence, but also the certainty that mercy and resolve, together, could bend even poison tides back toward life. Night wind lashed the deck of Night's Whisper as it cut through the swell toward Moonless Isle's jagged silhouette. Eric stood at the bow, hood drawn against salt spray, clutching the 3 codex fragments in his satchel. Behind him, Lorraine and Lyssa stowed the glass conduit tubes, while Era murmured the Chronicle's word to hold back hidden currents. Myron leaned on the rail, pale face lit by lantern glow as she prayed the final page would await them beneath the drowned cathedral. At dawn's gray edge, the sloop rounded a reef of razor-sharp basalt. A single battered jetty led to a crumbling staircase carved into the cliff face, slick with foam and driftwood. Jex dropped anchor and Cullum secured the line with a knot of oath and steel. "Watch the tides," he warned. "They turn twice as fast here." They climbed into the isle's hollow heart, lungs burning as they reached a moss-choked archway marked with half-erased lunar runes. Inside, the air was thick with salt and shadow. Their lanterns carved islands of light across walls encrusted with coral and barnacles. At its center, a vast chamber opened onto a subterranean lagoon. Its water black as ink, broken only by ghost-white columns that rose like the spines of leviathans from some ancient seabed. Lyssa pointed to a submerged dais at the lagoon's depths, where a single vellum page lay sealed in driftwood filigree. The final codex fragment. Eric nodded and steeled himself. He drew the satchel free and handed it to Marin. "Keep the others safe," he said, voice low. Then he Cullum and Jex donned diving tubes crafted from silver-lined glass. They slipped beneath the surface, guided by Era's soft wards spreading from the shore. Cold water closed over Eric's head, and he finned toward the dais, ghost reef brushing his arm. At 3 breaths, he reached the platform, a mosaic of moon glyphs carved into living coral. He pressed the first 3 pages against the glyphs, and they glowed in sequence, pulsing a path to the final slot. Behind him, a low rumble shook the lagoon, the echo of the island settling beneath its own weight. Eric dove deeper, prying the driftwood frame free with a twist of his dagger. The vellum slipped into his grasp, the 4th page its script alive with the promise of transcendence. But as he rose for air, a distant shriek reverberated through water and stone, something massive stirring in the abyss below. He broke the surface, gasping, lungs searing with cold. Jex hauled himself up, Dragoon Tangle dragging him half asleep onto the beach. "We've woken something," Jex panted, eyes wide. From the lagoon's black heart came a crash of tearing water. An immense form shifting beneath the waves, a crown of coral spikes fracturing the surface. Eric staggered back with the codex clutched to his chest. Marin and Lorraine swept him toward the exit, as Eric called out a word of rushing wind. The sloop's lanterns bobbed in the surf, beckoning them to safety. But behind, the sea roiled with living fury. Something ancient, awakened by their theft of the final page. Lissa was the last to scramble ashore, her crystal shard flickering in warning. Together they raced up the moss-slick stairs, the thunder of collapsing rock echoing behind them. Reaching the deck, Jex cast off the lines even as the tide surged around the jetty's ruin. Oars caught, silk sails snapped. The boat lurched free just as a pillar of living coral burst from the lagoon in a geyser of brine and scream. Night's whisper pitched into the open sea, lantern light scattering across foam that glowed like ghostly lanternfish. Eric stood at the prow, breath coming in ragged sobs of triumph and dread. In his satchel lay the 4th page, the final piece of the Codex of Selene. But behind them the ancient isle groaned under the weight of unleashed magic, and ahead lay every choice he had yet to face. As the sloop slipped into the silver dusk, the wind carried a single whisper through the rigging. The Codex's moon-lit script was complete, and the elixir of lunar transcendence awaited its brewer. Yet in that quiet promise, Eric heard the first murmur of the night's true trials still to come. Night's whisper fought the rising swell as Eric Solrin stood at the prow, the 4 Codex pages secured in his satchel like a heartbeat against his chest. Behind him, the silhouette of Moonless Isle receded beneath a violent wash of silver spray, its drowned cathedral stirring an ancient hunger in the deep. Below deck, Marin and Cathalor bent over the Codex fragments laid upon a lantern-lit table. Their fingers traced the intertwined verses of Moonlight, Tide, and Sacrifice, each page revealing a piece of the elixir's formula, and yet hinting at trials still unspoken. "We'll need lunar-forged silver, blossoms only found under an eclipse," Marin murmured, eyes wide. "And the petals of the midnight lotus, rare beyond measure." Lorraine leaned in, voice low. "The children of the eclipse hoard those blooms in the ruined rose gardens beneath the city's old necropolis. They guard them with necromantic ward beasts." A chill passed through the cabin above deck. Callum the paladin kept watch on the dark horizon, sunburst armor glinting, even in the moon's reflection. "They will pursue," he said without turning. They already sensed the Codex's completion. His gauntleted fist tightened on the rail. Lissa joined him, the hush of wave and wind in her hair. "We can't head straight back to Ebon Spire," she whispered. "They'll be ready. We must first gather what the Codex demands, then return under the veil of the next eclipse." Eric climbed onto the deck, the salt air clearing his thoughts. "Agreed," he said, voice firm. "First, the silver, the sundered mines of Crestspur, old veins bathed in starlight. There we can forge the lunar alloy we need." He paused, pulling the satchel of pages free. "But I must know, will this elixir truly restore my sister, or will it bind her to some darker fate?" Ira emerged from the companionway, wards flickering on her sleeves. "There is always risk," she said gently. "The Codex itself warns that life and death are 2 sides of the same moon. To master one is to invite the other." She laid a hand on Eric's arm. "But the choice is yours." The ship dipped as a sudden gale ripped across the waves, an unbidden storm that rolled in upon them like a warning from the deep. Jenks, the smuggler captain, scrambled to the helm. "Storm's coming, and not natural," he yelled above the wind. "Something follows us." Through the lantern glow and spray, Eric saw shapes in the black water, great curling forms that trailed phosphorescent chill, spawn of the drowned cathedral's awakening. A low chorus of inhuman calls rose from the depths. Kaelin drew both swords in a single movement. "Ready the war," he bellowed. Ira raised her staff as violet glyphs blossomed across the deck. weaving a barrier against storm and sea. Lissa and Marin sprang to haul in the sails, while Lorraine poured a vial of moonstone dust onto the windlass, dulling the gale's edge in a halo of shimmer. Eric closed his eyes and whispered the chronicle's final binding verse. Lunar light and tide entwine, grant us passage twixt sea and time. Let no shade of only night break the heart of day's first shine. A radiant arc of silver light snapped across the storm, severing each watery tendril before it could lash the hull. The sea fell silent, the shapes in the depths recoiled, disappearing into fathomless gloom. When Eric opened his eyes, the world had stilled, save for the soft hiss of sea against wood. Night's whisper creaked forward under a single sail, moonlight dancing across its prow. Far behind, the storm clouds dissolved, revealing the distant glow of Ebonspire's lanterns on the far shore. Eric clenched the codex pages, their moonlit ink pulsing with promise and with the weight of choices still to come. Ahead lay the sundered mines, the ruined rose gardens, and the final reckoning with both the children of the eclipse and the price of his sister's salvation. As night's whisper sliced through the quiet sea toward dawn's first promise, Eric Soldrin steeled himself. Whatever trials the elixir demanded, he would meet them. For in the interplay of moonlight and mercy, he had learned that true transcendence is never found in power alone, but in the courage to embrace the unknown. And so, with the city's lights faint on the horizon and the codex complete in his grasp, he prepared to navigate the next currents, where myth and moonshine blur, and the alchemist's greatest secret still waits beyond the next midnight tide. The sails snapped taut again, as night's whisper slipped into the narrow fjord that led to the sundered mines of Crespur. Jagged cliffs rose on either side, sheer walls of pale granite streaked with veins of glittering moonstone. At the fjord's head lay the mine's battered entrance, an iron portcullis warped by ancient spells, flanked by carved runes half erased by time and weather. Eric plunged into the shallows to haul the anchor free, while Callum and Garrick secured the rope line. Above them, Lorraine and Lissa climbed the deck to scout the jagged ledges for hidden cultist traps. Nothing moves, Lissa reported, voice low, but her hand hovered on the hilt of her dagger. Yet the stones themselves seemed to walk. They drew the sloop up to a rough jetty of split boulders. Era drew a circle of violet light at the mine-mouth's threshold, chanting softly to hold back collapse war. Marin and Cathalor unloaded their smithing kit. Portable bellows, crucibles of star iron and pouches of shattered prism glass. Eric hefted the satchel of codex pages, heart pounding as the moon's first rays filtered through the mine's gaping maw. Inside, the air was cool and metallic. Stalactites of pure moonstone dripped phosphorescent droplets onto rusted tracks. Lanterns in hand, they followed the echoing tunnel until it opened into a vast cavern walls, festooned with veins of silver ore that gleamed like ribbons of starlight. At its center, a collapsed forge once tended by dwarven masons lay cold beneath a fractured ceiling that admitted the full glare of dawn. Here we smelt, Marin declared, setting up her forge upon a natural outcropping. But first we must clear the old wars. She traced her goggles with trembling fingers as Eric uncorked the vial of sunrise dew and poured it over a ring of rune-carved stones. The runes flared golden, then cracked and fell away, freeing the cavern from centuries of enforced sunlight that had turned every forge master blind. With a muted roar, Garrick stoked the bellows alongside Cathalor, and molten star iron dripped into the silver ore, hissing like captured moonlight. Ura wove wind glyphs through the drafts to temper the heat, while Lissa and Lorraine clambered the ore veins, chipping fresh silver fragments into waiting crucibles. As dawn rose through the fractured roof, Eric poured the melted silver into a mold carved with the codex's tide pattern. The metal cooled in shimmering waves that seemed alive with lunar energy. Yet even as the first bar of lunar-forged silver emerged, its surface rippling like a calm night sea, Eric felt a deeper tremor beneath his feet. From the tunnel's shadowed depths came a low, resonant hum, as if the mine itself awakened, wary of this alchemy rekindled. Eric exchanged a glance with his companions, each face ghosted with hope and unease. They had won the silver they needed for the elixir, but Crespur's ancient stones held secrets darker than mere collapse wards. Deep within those catacombs, the final rites awaited, and with them, questions of whether the light they pursued could ever outshine the shadows they had stirred. They loaded the last glowing ingot of lunar-forged silver onto Night's Whisper's deck as the mine's rafters groaned behind them. Eric Solren paused at the cavern mouth, inhaling the cool mountain air tinged with moonstone dust. "We have the silver," he said to Marin. "Now for the midnight lotus." Below decks, Lorraine consulted the codex's fourth page by lantern light. Its tiding shimmered as she traced the lines where tombs of roses bleed no dew. In shadowed rows the night blooms grew. Lissa folded the page carefully. "Ruined rose gardens beneath Ebonspire's old necropolis," she said, voice low. "A place of bones and thorn, only the dead know its secrets." Eric nodded and turned to Callum. Set a course around the city walls. We'll approach under the cover of the western heights, avoid the patrols in the alleyways. By midday they slipped ashore in a hidden cove. The sloop's lanterns dimmed to avoid notice. The party moved through overgrown lanes of the old burial grounds. Cracked mausoleums draped in ivy, marble angels weeping moss, petals of black roses carpeted the earth. Their scent a heady mixture of decay and promise. Ahead, behind a crumbling crypt, lay the ruined rose gardens, a courtyard ringed with broken columns entwined by thorn boughs, at whose heart a sunken fountain dripped stagnant water. In its basin floated the pale ghost-white petals of the midnight lotus flowers, whose veins caught the waning moonlight like spectral fire. Marin knelt at the edge and reached for a cluster of blossoms, but a sudden rustle stopped her breath. From the shadows emerged the children of the eclipse, cultists in midnight veils, their eyes gleaming with fanatical fervor. At their center stood the high devotee, scepter raised, a black crystal humming with necromantic power. "Fools," the devotee intoned, voice echoing against broken stone, "you would poison our debts and swamp our rights with stolen light." He gestured, and the lotus petals twisted into thorn snakes that slithered toward Marin. Kellen drew both swords in an instant, sunburst steel shimmering. "We stand between you and these blossoms," he shouted, charging with a warrior's cry. Behind him, Garrick smashed a column into the courtyard, sending debris flying, and scattering the serpentine petal. Eric shouted the Chronicle's moon ward, "Shadows brood and serpents bite, yield to dawn's unerring light." A silver wave pulsed from his hands, dispelling the necrotic hiss from the petals and transforming them into still, gentle blooms once more. The courtyard fell silent, but for the devotee's mocking laughter. Lorraine slipped forward, brandishing her silver filigreed wire. She traced a binding circle around the fountain's rim, chanting in the veil-born tongue. The black crystal scepter flared, and with a crack of warped light, the devotee vanished, snatched into a rift between worlds. In the hush that followed, Eric and Marin gathered the midnight lotus petals, their petals trembling with latent magic. Lissa sealed them in a warded pouch, and Eris stilled the courtyard with a final cloud scribe rune. As they slipped away through the ivy-hung colonnade, the necropolis seemed to exhale, releasing its hold on death for a single stolen moment. Night's whisper awaited at the harbor beyond the western gates, sails furled against the coming eclipse. Eric paused on the shore, moonlight dancing on his upturned face. 3 fragments of moonlit codex, lunar silver in hand, and blooms of midnight promise nestled at his belt, yet the elixir still lay unwritten, its final steps veiled in both wonder and dread. He climbed aboard in silence, eyes fixed on the city's silhouette rising against the sky, now edged in dawn's first gold. Ahead lay the last uncharted trial, forging the elixir itself, and deciding whether to master life and death or be mastered by them. And as night's whisper slipped once more into open waters, the question burned brightest of all: who would survive the alchemist's choice when moonlight and mortality intertwine? Dawn's first pale fingers pried night's whisper from Abinspire's harbor, sending ripples across the silver-streaked basin. Eric stood at the prow, the weight of every recovered ingredient heavy in his pack. The 4 moonlit codex pages, bars of lunar-forged silver, buds of the midnight lotus, and his sister's vial of life essence. Ahead lay the secluded forge of Selene, a cliffside sanctum, said to channel direct moonbeams into living fire. Below decks, Marin and Cathalor assembled the crucible at the forge's heart, a bowl of starlit quartz warmed by ancient wind crystal coil. Lorraine and Lissa prepared the alchemical reagents, dew distilled under full moon, petals ground to gleaming dust, and silver spun into filaments. Era traced a circle of tide runwork on the floorboards, an anchor for the elixir's binding magic. As the sloop glided beneath the jagged cliffs of Selene's Pass, a single lantern beam from the sanctum's open archway cut through the morning mist. The forge of Selene, a domed chamber of polished obsidian, beckoned with quiet power. They beached the sloop on a narrow ledge of slick stone. Callan's gauntlet tapped Eric's shoulder. "Beyond this door," he murmured, "the moon's own forge awaits, but its fire demands sacrifice." Eric nodded, chest tight. He led them into the circular hall, where moonlight streamed through a fractured oculus, striking the quartz basin in a pillar of living silver. The air thrummed with power, so potent it made his veins hum. Marin poured molten bar into the basin, the silver rippling like liquid moonlight. Era chanted the Chronicle's unifying verse: "Moon and tide, wind and light, converge here in sacred rite." The basin flared as the silver glowed white-hot. Eric then drew the midnight lotus dust into the crystal vial, touching the codex's tiding script to the glass. As he whispered the final alchemical formula, the dust shimmered, infusing the molten silver with veins of pale blue. At last, Eric lifted a small ladle and dipped it into the living metal. His hand trembled as he poured the first drop of molten elixir into the waiting vial of his sister's life essence. The 2 liquids merged with a hiss like falling starlight, swirling into a single pearl of glowing luminescence. The chamber fell utterly silent. Then, in that breathless moment, the silver pillar of moonlight above flared and black shadows recoiled from its glow. Eric exhaled, tears brimming in his eyes. He held the completed elixir of lunar transcendence aloft, its surface rippling with every phase of the moon. Yet beyond the sanctum's threshold, an echo answered, the distant toll of necromantic bells. The children of the eclipse rallying beneath cloud-shrouded skies. Drawn by the elixir's birth, Eric's triumph twisted with dread. He turned to his friends. Caelim's steady nod, Myron's odd relief, Lorraine's determined half-smile, and Lyssa's fierce glare, and that shared look passed both victory and warning. The elixir was complete, but the choice of how and when to use it could reshape life and death across Calendar. No final words marked the moment, only the hum of living moonlight and the unspoken truth that their greatest trial had only just begun. Night's whisper crested the final swell before Avon Spire's harbor just as the sun slipped below the eastern hills, turning the sky to bruised purple. Eric Solrin stood at the rail, vial of the elixir of lunar transcendence clasped in both hands, its pearlescent glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Behind him, the city's lanterns winked to life, and the distant keening of funeral bells marked the nearness of the children of the eclipse's midnight ritual. Lorraine dropped from the deck, cloak swirling. My contacts have cleared a path through the narrow quarter, she said, voice urgent. We must reach your sister's chamber in the Moonshadow Infirmary before the cult breaches the wards. Lyssa snatched the vial from Eric's grasp, pressing it into his satchel glinting with moon ink. No blood spilled on these stones, she vowed, crouching to secure the hat. Below decks, Marin and Cathalor readied the forged tools, silver trays, crystal basins, and distilled sunrise dew, anything to mend wounds or sanctify warts. Era ran her staff along the bulwarks, igniting violet glyphs that would repel any necromantic intruder. Kellam took the helm, guiding them through the crooked piers where shadow figures slipped between masts. They're gathering on the eastern quay, he warned, eyes narrowed. A tide of darkness, all drawn by the elixir's birth. Eric exhaled a tremor of relief as the sloop found its berth. He leapt onto the dock, cloak flapping as Kellam and Lyssa fell in around him. The Moonshadow Infirmary rose before them, a squat tower of pale stone scarred with ward runes that flickered in the lantern light. Inside, the corridors echoed with hushed prayers and the soft drip of healing potion. Eric's sister lay upon a marble slab, pallid as dawn mist, her pulse a slow, hollow whisper. He approached the bedside altar, where a silver salver waited, etched with the combined runes of the Chronicle and Codex. Marin laid out the crystal basins. Era stood at his shoulder, staff humming. Lyssa and Lorraine formed a protective ward at the door, eyes peeled for cultists drawn by the elixir's moon song. With trembling fingers, Eric uncorked the vial and poured the glowing liquid into the salve. The elixir shimmered like liquid moonbeam, and as he lifted it to his sister's lips, a hush fell over the chamber. Her chest began to rise and fall more firmly, frosted lashes fluttering in fragile awakening. Tears blurred Eric's vision as her fingers twitched. He gripped her hand, voice thick with joy. Welcome back, sister. But that single wondrous moment shattered with an echoing crash. Ward stones above the infirmary door exploded outward, and a surge of black-veined mists poured in behind a cadre of robed cultists, their hollow chants drowning out the lantern's glow. Column's sword flared in defense, as Garrick and the infirmary guards rallied to hold the line. Lyssa swept Eric's sister into Era's arms, stepping between her and the encroaching darkness. Go keep her safe, she shouted. Eric stared, heart torn between the fragile spark of life before him and the gathering tide of necromantic hosts. His sister's eyes opened, clear moonlight reflecting in panic. In his hand the vial's balance promised both salvation and oblivion. He turned to face the doorway as the children of the eclipse surged forward, faces shrouded in midnight veils, scepters swirling with stolen dusk. Behind them the city's bells tolled the midnight hour, and the air shimmered with the coming eclipse. Eric raised his voice fierce with resolve and dread. We stand between life and oblivion. And as the first shadowed footfall reached the threshold, Eric Soldrin, Moonlight Alchemist, brother and guardian of both dawn and dusk, made his choice. Even as the chamber trembled with the promise of what would come next, the night held its breath. Eric's heart thundered in his chest as the first cultist crossed the threshold, black mist curling around their scepter. Column's blade met theirs with a clang that reverberated against the infirmary's marble walls, sparks cascading like funerary ember. Eric landed her staff in the center of the room, violet wards flaring outward in a protective dome around Eric's sister. Stay within the light, she called, voice steady above the chaos. The cloned glow of moon glyphs carved into the floor pulsed, repelling the creeping darkness. Lyssa darted forward, twin daggers humming, to intercept a pair of robed zealots. She carved through their sashes of ink-washed silk, turning their advance into a stumble. Behind her, Marin and Cathalor hurled vials of distilled sunrise dew into the fray. Each shattering droplet burst into a fountain of golden steam that seared away clinging shadows. Jarring thunder pounded overhead as the eclipse reached its zenith. Daylight slammed against the infirmary's wards, dimming the violet runes and feeding the cultists' necrotic scepters. Eric felt the tide turn against him. Darkness seeped through cracks in the marble floor, tendrils of cold that sought to smother the light of life at his sister's side. He gripped the empty elixir vial in one hand and the remaining codex page in the other, mind racing. A single phrase from the text pulsed in his memory: "When shadow comes to claim the flame, the final bond shall break the chain." With a cry that echoed through arch and alcove, Eric sprang forward, planting the codex page on the altar's silver rim. He splashed the last drops of life essence from its vial over the page. The inked runes ignited in blinding white light, and a shockwave of pure moonbeams rippled outward. The necrotic scepters wavered, their black crystals fracturing under the brilliant. Cultists screamed as shadows peeled from their robes and fled in ragged wisps. Kaelin drove the remaining zealots from the doorway with a shining arc of sunsteel. Garrick smashed an overturned bench across the threshold, sealing the breach with iron and resolve. Silence crashed down in the wake of the storm of light. The wards held firm, the violet glow returning stronger than before, fortified by the codex's final verse. Eric knelt beside his sister as her eyes fluttered open, pupils clear and bright with living moonlight. He brushed her hair back, voice choking with relief. "You're safe now." Outside, the bells ceased their tolling, and the eclipse's shadow receded from the infirmary window. In that moment, life and death stood balanced on the edge of dawn, and Eric realized that while the elixir had saved his sister, its true power lay not in mastering death, but in forging bonds of light strong enough to repel the deepest darkness. And as the first true ray of sunrise pierced the warded dome, Eric Solrin rose, codex in hand, ready to guide both Moonlight and Mercy into a new day. His journey forever unended in the ever-turning dance of night and dawn. As dawn's first pale rays filtered through the infirmary's warded dome, Eric Solrin helped his sister to her feet, her skin warm with renewed life yet still shimmering with fleeting traces of moonlight. Around them the survivors, Colum, Ira, Lissa and Marin, stood weary but unbowed, their weapons sheathed and wards still glowing softly in the morning hush. Beyond the heavy oak doors, the narrow quarter stirred with cautious hope. Citizens peered from shuttered windows and distant church bells told a day of remembrance rather than mourning. Eric exchanged a quiet nod with Lorraine, whose lips curved in relief. "The children of the eclipse are broken for now," she said, voice low, "but their shadows linger in every forgotten alley." Marin knelt to gather the shattered shards of the necromantic scepters, placing each fragment into a lead-lined box bound with tide rune. "These pieces will be buried beneath the forge of Selene," she vowed, "where no hand can rekindle their darkness." Lissa slipped Eric's sister an enamel-painted doll, her first gift since the coma, its painted eyes wide with gentle light. The girl clutched it and smiled, a fragile blossom of innocence restored. Colin placed a hand on Eric's shoulder. "The elixir has done its work," he said softly, "but the codex speaks of a final harmony, one that must be sung beneath both full moon and rising sun." Eric turned toward the vaulted ceiling, where moon glyphs and sun glyphs glowed side by side. In his satchel lay 4 codex pages, the last now inked with the elixir's binding verse. Beyond the infirmary walls, even Spire's streets awaited their steps. Allies to thank, ruins to cleanse, and arcane mysteries still hidden among moonlit tombs and tide-scarred temples. He drew a steady breath, the promise of new challenges stirring in his chest. Whatever lay ahead, lost pages yet undiscovered, the echoes of cultist vengeance, or the delicate balance between life and death. Eric Sulren knew his path remained unwritten, a winding tide of moonlight and mercy that would carry him ever onward. The morning light found even Spire's streets awash in a gentle gold, the long shadow of the eclipse finally lifted from its rooftops. Eric Sulren stepped from the Moonshadow Infirmary beside his sister, her hand clutching Lissa's as she took tentative, sure-footed steps into the courtyard. Around them, a small crowd had gathered, lantern-bearers, who once tended the wards now carried garlands of moon bloom, and healers from distant wards knelt to offer blessings of dawn. Eric paused at the infirmary gate, to watch his sister greet each face. Stooped elders whose children she had once comforted, street urchins who had left her daysless flowers, Lorraine handing over a fresh vial of sunrise dew to replenish her life's work. He realized in that moment that the elixir's greatest power was not its spark of resurrection, but the web of compassion it had reforged across the city's fractured heart. Behind him, Kellen the Paladin conversed quietly with Ira and Marin beside a marble fountain still wet with warded water. Their expressions were grave, voices hushed with the weight of their next task, binding the Codex's final verse into the city's great ward of 4 phases, a living tapestry of runes that would guard Kalendra's people through every lunar cycle. Must you really return to the forge so soon? Eric's sister asked, her voice soft with wonder. She lifted the doll Lissa had given her, an enamel dove whose wings caught the morning sun. Eric smiled, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her brow. There is still much to learn, he replied. The elixir saved you, but the Codex has more to teach, and the world beyond these walls still trembles under lingering shadows. As he turned toward the distant spires of the Forge of Selene, gleaming now not only with moonlit quartz but with the promise of shared dawn, Eric felt the steady pulse of moon ink runes against his side. The path ahead would lead him through shifting tides, hidden archives and the fragile alliance of light and life he'd helped forge. And somewhere beyond the city's cradle, in ruins under a waxing moon, or at the edge of a hidden bay, the next fragment of mystery waited to be revealed. So Eric Solren, Moonlight Alchemist, brother, and guardian of both dawn and dusk, took his first steps into the bright unknown, knowing that each sunrise and moonrise yet to come would carry him farther along the unending dance of light and shadow. Eric led the small company through winding streets toward the Forge of Selene's cliffside sanctum, each step echoing against shuttered doorways and shuddering lamps, still blinking from the eclipse's long shadow. At his side walked Caleb, whose polished cuirass caught stray shafts of dawn. Behind him, Ira's violet wards pulsed faintly through her robes like lantern light in the dark. Lissa and Lorraine carried satchels heavy with lotus petals and rune-etched silver plates, while Marin and Cathalor cradled the completed elixir vial as if it were the fragile pulse of a newborn star. They climbed slick switchbacks carved into the granite cliff, handholds worn smooth by pilgrims of both faith and folly, until the forge's obsidian doors yawned before them. Inside, the vaulted hall was stripped bare save for the great ward of 4 phases, an enormous circular dais etched with sun glyphs, moon glyphs, tide runes and cloud veins, all converging upon a central well of living quartz. Eric's breath caught at the sight. This nexus would bind the Codex's final verse into Kalendra's very soil. Ira stepped forward first, tracing each quarter of the dais with her staff as she intoned the chronicle's anchoring chant. The runes glowed in turn, gold at dawn, silver beneath moonlight, pale blue in the tide's ebb, and white in the cloud's drift, until the entire disk shimmered with a prismatic heartbeat. Marin laid the lunar-forged silver plates into the carved grooves, each one snapping into place with a pulse of light. Lissa poured the ground lotus dust into the well's rim, sending tendrils of translucent mist spiraling upward. As Eric approached the dais with the 4 codex pages spread before him, a sudden tremor rattled the hall. The doors shuddered inward to admit a half-dozen cloaked figures, their faces obscured by eclipse shrouds, members of a radical Veilborn faction, who believed the ward would only bind magic to tyranny. Steel rang on stone as Kalen drew his sunburst blade, and Lorraine flung silver filigreed wire to ensnare the intruder's weapons. Eric stood at the heart of the dais, codex in hand, as the first cultist lunged with a scepter crackling with corrupted moonmote. Time slowed. In that suspended breath he saw the hope in Era's wards, the fury in Lissa's eyes, the steady resolve in Marin's trembling hands. He pressed the pages flat against the quartz well and whispered the final binding verse, voice unwavering even as steel met steel around him. 4 phases bound in endless flow, as moon and sun and cloud and tide shall grow. A living ward no shadow breaks, by light of heart and hand it waits. A cascade of glowing glyphs erupted from the dais, sweeping across the hall in a wave of pure unyielding radiance. The cultists staggered back, their eclipse scepters fracturing in shards of smoldering night. Kalen drove the last zealot through the throne-open doors, and Lorraine sealed them with a warded twist of moonstone dust. The forge trembled as the ward's glow washed over every rune, every wall glyph, until even the quartz well pulsed like a second heartbeat beneath their feet. Eric's sister, brought by guards from the infirmary, stood in the portal, eyes wide at the living tapestry of light and life. He exhaled, every tension in his body releasing in a tremor of awe and relief. Yet beyond the forge's vaulted ceiling, the sky deepened once more toward dusk, and a distant howl drifted up on the wind, the echo of a reckoning still to come. As Eric stepped down from the dais, codex and elixir at his hip, he knew this sanctuary of light would only hold as long as the courage of those who tended it, and that the next shadow would arrive on silent feet. Seish, the ward of 4 phases, hummed with steady life. Eric Solrain and his companions lingered in the forge's vaulted glow, catching their breath. Beyond the doors the cliff face groaned under the weight of unseen tides, and Era's wards shivered in uneasy response. Kalen sheathed his sunburst blade and approached Eric, hand on his shoulder. The ward stands for now, but elsewhere, the children of the eclipse conspire beneath the next moonrise. Lissa slid a hand from her dagger sheath, scanning the cavern's rim. In the vault of hidden eclipses, they fashion weapons from shadow glass. If they learn to fracture our new ward, they'll drown Kalendra in darkness. Marin brushed soot from her goggles. We must strike at their forges before they arm every zealot with night steel. Lorraine produced a faintly glowing parchment, a map of forgotten catacombs stretching beneath Ibn Spire's foundations. Here lies the vault, she said, tracing a twisting route below the city's old cathedral. It's defended by Deathward runes and collapsed passage. Only those of the Codex's binding can pass safely. Eric folded the map, Codex pages fluttering at his belt. Then we go tonight, he declared, before the ward's light dims with the setting sun. They gathered their lanterns, tools and the elixir's empty vial, now a symbol of both triumph and burden. As they descended the forge's stone steps, moonlight faded behind them and dawn's promise gave way to shadows, still unbidden. Outside, night's whisper lay at its mooring, sails furled. Jack stood on deck, waiting with a quiet grin. Thought you lot might need a swift departure, he said, gesturing to the waiting rowboats, poised to carry them into Ibn Spire's underbelly. With final nods, Eric led the way into the morning mist, 4 light-bearers venturing into the vaulted gloom beneath a city still awakening to its own salvation. Beyond each carved rune and collapsed arch, the vault of hidden eclipses awaited their challenge, and with it the next chapter of a journey that would test the very bonds of moonlight and mercy they had just forged. A hush fell over the docks of Ibn Spire as the last lanterns winked out, leaving only the pale glow of dawn's first light and the faint pulse of violet wards shimmering around the forge's outer walls. Eric Sulrin led the small company down the narrow gangway toward the waiting rowboats, each vessel's prow carved with sun glyphs to guide them through the city's silent canals. Behind him fell Cullum the paladin, sword sheathed but ever ready, while Lorraine and Lissa followed with lanterns and a tightly folded map of the catacombs below the old cathedral. At the stern, Marion and Cathalor balanced the empty elixir vial and the 4 codex pages in a lead-lined crate, breathing hard but eyes bright with determination. Era brought up the rear, tracing wind glyphs in the air to keep their passage undisturbed by patrolling spirits or wayward current. The gondolier, a taciturn man known only as Jex, slipped the boat's mooring lines free with silent efficiency. With 2 strokes of his oar, the first skiff glided into the canal, its hull cutting through oil-slick water that mirrored the spire-tipped skyline. A second boat followed, carrying Killam, Myron, and Cathalor, while the third, manned by Lissa and Lorraine, bore Eric's sister tucked beneath a light cloak, her recovered health no shield against the journey's dangers. They paddled past shuttered wharves and empty quay lanes, the stone walls rising like watchful sentinels on either side. Here and there, patches of moss whispered in the dawn breeze, and faint ozone clung to the air, a reminder of the forge's lingering power. Era's wards pulsed softly at each canal bend, scattering drifting fog and keeping hidden dangers at bay. Eric steeled himself with each measured stroke, the weight of the codex pages a tangible reminder that their mission transcended his personal triumph. At the cathedral's watergate, Lissa raised a frozen hand. "Silence's crypt entrance is here," she whispered, voice echoing off the granite sill. Below a narrow sluice, a rusted iron ring hung from a thick chain. Lorraine produced a key of silver veneered moonstone, an artifact from the Valeborn archives, and slipped it into the lock. With a whispered click, the sluice gate groaned upward, revealing a spiraling stone staircase descending into darkness. Jex nudged the prow against the slim shoreline. Eric stepped onto slick steps first, lantern held aloft. His sister slipped in behind him, clutching Lorraine's arm for support. The rest followed in careful single file, Kalen's armor rattling, Marin's lantern beam dancing over uneven steps, Lissa's silhouette ghosting just beyond Eric's peripheral vision, and Era's wards casting polychrome glimmers on the damp wall. The staircase spiraled down for what felt like endless turns, each arc revealing more age-worn glyphs that pulsed faintly with lunar energy. Moisture dripped from the ceiling in intermittent plinks, each drop a reminder of the waterborne life above. At last they reached a wide corridor where the air throbbed with hidden power. The very stones underfoot carried the hum of necromantic wards. Here, Eric paused and drew the first codex page, its tied ink script swirling like living mist. "Follow me," he said quietly, tracing the page's instructions. Step by step he walked the length of the corridor, pausing at runes carved into the floor. A circle of crescent moons, a spiral of waves, an encircled star. With each rune he pressed his fingertip ink meeting stone, and watched the ward symbols fade into harmless etchings. Behind him Lissa gathered the extinguished shards for safekeeping. Era murmured a blessing, as the final glyph surrendered its hold, and the corridor's dark hush gave way to a higher vaulted chamber. Torches mounted in iron sconces flared as though awakened by their passage, revealing a mosaic-tiled floor depicting the phases of a blood moon eclipse. At its center stood a dozen cultists in midnight robes, chanting in a language thick with sorrow and menace, their voices wove into a chant that shook the stone columns overhead. Eric's heart thundered. Ahead lay the vault of hidden eclipse. The cultist scepters tipped with obsidian shards glowed with a hollow light. Lyssa slipped to Eric's side, twin daggers drawn. Caleb drew sun steel, and Era's staff hummed with warded power. Marin, cheeks pale, readied a satchel of molten silver bars, ready to forge blockage runes once the cultists fell. Eric stepped onto the mosaic floor, codex page held high. By moonlight balanced by tide, we claim this chamber for life, he intoned, voice steady against the cult's rising chorus. The floor's tiles flickered, and the cultist's chant faltered in surprise. A wind glyph from Era swept through the columned hall, snuffing unsteady torch flames in a swirl of violet breeze. In the sudden hush, Caleb charged, cutting a path through the cultist's front line. His blade arced in a sunburst of steel, scattering robed figures into the hall's side chamber. Lyssa darted forward to intercept any who fled toward the scepter vault. Marin and Kalilor flung handfuls of star steel into the mosaic seams. Each shard clanged into place, sealing lines of ritual power beneath the stone. Eric advanced to the dais at the chamber's far end, where the grand eclipse scepter taller than any man's height rested upon a black marble plinth. Its crystal crown pulsed with shadow light as though breathing with mallet. Behind it rose twin portcullises of shadow metal, etched with runes that glowed red. A leader emerged from the chanting circle, a silver-haired priestess whose eyes gleamed like molten tar. Meddler, she hissed, staff raised, you cannot seal what night itself commands. She struck the dais with a scepter tip. A wave of darkness surged outward, but Era met it with a ward burst of violet light that shattered the curve of shadow around them. A battle roiling in splintered chants and clashing steel ensued. Kalim's sunblade met the priestess's staff in a clash that sent sparks raining like brief meteors. Lyssa flanked the robed acolytes, daggers sweeping through their ink-washed robe. Marin applied the final silver plates to the mosaic, the codex's tide runes, now sealed and glowing in pale blue, while Cathalor busied herself shattering the scepters swirling around them. Eric reached the scepter plinth, codex page pressed to the black marble. He traced the final binding verse, voice rising, shadows thrown and eclipses claim, yield to light's unbroken flame, barriers forged by tide and rune, seal this crown till recast by moon. The twin portcullises ground downward, sealing the scepter behind iron bars infused with moon ink and silver. The scepter's crystal hissed in fury, then cracked from base to tip, its shards falling a shower of harmless obsidian fragment. In the ensuing silence, the ritual circle of chanting collapsed into stumbling retreat. The priestess, eyes wide with disbelief, dropped her staff and fled into the winding corridors. The remaining cultists, their spells undone, fell to their knees, scepters clattering at their feet. Kellen stood atop the dais, sun steel dripping with shadow ash. He glanced down at Arik, who exhaled in relief as Era's ward settled into a calm pulse. Lyssa sprang to Arik's side, offering him the final codex page. He tucked it into the lead-lined crate with the others, the four fragments now safely united under one cause, to guard light against every ebb of darkness. Marin and Cathalor secured the silver plates and silver steel bars, ensuring the vault would remain sealed until the ward of 4 phases could be extended beneath the chapel above. Outside, the church bells tolled noon, each peal a reminder that night and day were bound in perpetual day. The company gathered in the moonlit corridor, dusting ash from their armor and robes. Kellen sheathed his blade, nodding in approval. The vault is ours, he said quietly, but this victory marks only one step in a longer path. Eric met Kellen's gaze, eyes steady. Then we walk it together, he replied. He looked around at his companions, Era's wards fading to pale dusk glow, Lyssa sharpening her daggers by candlelight, Lorraine folding away the map, Marin tending to a final welding seam on the silver plate. He breathed in the air thick with ancient dust, salt and possibility. They retraced their steps through the catacombs, the sealed vault behind them humming with dormant power. Each corridor now seemed less forbidding, the faded runes ignited by their passage. At the water gate they emerged blinking into gold-washed afternoon and boarded the rowboats for the return canal. Eric stood at the prow once more, the lead-lined crate bearing the codex and elixir secured at his feet. Ahead lay the heart of Ebenspire, the infirmary where his sister awaited, the ward of 4 phases newly forged in the forge above, and countless streets where the ripple of their deeds would carry both hope and caution. As the skiffs pulled in unison toward the city's guard-scored harbor, Eric felt the steady pulse of the codex pages against his thigh, a quiet heartbeat that reminded him of both the light they had reclaimed and the shadows yet to come. In the waning glow of afternoon he offered a silent vow to guard that balance with every breath. every step and every drop of moonlight and mercy he could muster. And so, as Ebonspire's ancient sluice gates parted to welcome them home, the Moonlight Alchemist led his friends forward, undaunted, unbroken and forever bound by the intertwined tides of dawn and dusk. As Ebonspire's twin canals shimmered beneath the afternoon sun, Eric Solren stood once more on the quay where his journey had begun. Codex and elixir secured, the ward of 4 phases humming its steady heartbeat in the city's veins. Around him, Callum led the militia in inspecting the sealed vault of hidden eclipses. Era guided apprentices, carving new wards into forgotten alleyways. Lissa slipped away to mend orphaned spirits in the narrow quarter, and Marin bent over her newly expanded forge, already dreaming of brighter design. Eric watched his sister laugh as she chased drifting petals across the infirmary courtyard, each blossom a symbol of life reclaimed and darkness held at bay. He felt the weight of every choice he had made, and every dawn yet to come. In his hand, he cradled the empty elixir vial, now a vessel of promise rather than need. The Codex's final verse pulsed in his satchel like a living promise, that moonlight and mercy bound by courage and compassion, would forever guide those who dared to walk between night and day. Yet beyond the city's lantern-lit streets and the forge's vaulted glare, distant shadows still stirred, whispers of hidden rites in the frost march, of lost pages buried beneath far-flung ruins, and of hearts both kindled and corrupted by the lure of transcendence. Eric exhaled, setting his gaze on the horizon where sea and sky met in silver haze. His path would wind through every phase, full moon, new moon and every waning light in between, calling him ever onward. With a steady step and a heart anchored by the friendships he'd forged, Eric Solren turned away from the quiet and walked into the unfolding tapestry of dawn, knowing that though this chapter had closed, his true story, like the moon's eternal cycle, would begin anew with each rising of the light.